I was her set designer. When she had assignments in class that they needed to design a set, I was the set designer. I actually wrote a little production thing for her and got one of the guys on my wing to act in it. So I was really, and then I was introduced to Kenneth Copeland and to his messages. And so by the time the end of 1976 came, we were engaged. Yes, we were. Terry came out to visit my parents on Cape Cod, and we're sitting in the car at the beach. I mean, I don't know why I'm telling you all this. We were sitting in the car at this beach, and we're freezing because it's December 31st, and it's cold. And I couldn't figure it. My friend let me use his Volkswagen Bug, and I could not figure out how to turn on the heat. Anyway, it was broken, so we're freezing. But we're talking there, and I was talking to Terry. I've only known her really since September, really October, knowing her very well. And we're talking back and forth. And I told her, we started talking about marriage. And I told her, I said, Terry, when the Lord is ready for us to get married, He said, it'll become so clear to us. We will know. We will absolutely know. And I could hear the voice of the Lord again. Now, the last time I heard the voice of the Lord like that, on the inside, He said, change your major, you're called to pastor. Well, this next time I heard His voice, He said, and he's very short with me on words, He said, what are you waiting for? So I asked her to marry me. Anyway, we went back to school, and one thing led to another, and I ended up working the summer job with Brother Copeland. And I never went back. He asked me to stay. He said, pray about it, stay. The ministry's growing. We're going on radio. So he asked me to stay, and I've been with him ever since. That's 43 years ago. 43 years ago. Longest summer job. Terry went back to school, and that was the tough part. That fall of 1976 was very difficult for me because I thought, what in the world have I done? I came from Oral Roberts University, the premier ministry and university of its day, and the Lord brought me to Texas to be in this ministry with 12 people in it. It was real small. So there were a couple of times when I questioned my decision, but she finished up that semester, came home, because the Lord told her to go there to put her dad on television, to learn television, to put her dad on television. So she came back. And so you ask, what happened to that pastoral thing? Well, it kind of disappeared for a little while. It went away. Not that I ignored it, but that I got so busy doing what I was doing. I started the art department here, and then it seemed like every time somebody left, I would inherit their department. The publications director left, so I got their department. And then I would get another department and another department. And the ministry is growing at such a rapid pace, and it's going so fast. It is going so fast. So I'm going through the rest of the decade of the 70s. I'm on the road with Brother Copeland. But you know what's happening? I'm being trained.
That's right. That's right.
I'm being trained. I'm being tested.
Yeah.
I'm getting regular, wasn't midterm tests like you got today, but I was getting regular tests in my ability to serve and to work under authority, under all kinds of conditions and all kinds of situations. Some situations that I thought, I'd like to leave, and I'd like to leave right now, but I can't. I can't quit this. But that pastoral anointing, it was working on the inside of me. See, that really has been, as I look back over it, that really has been my nature. I was talking to my sister the other day. She's 6 years older than I am. And I was thinking about it, and while I was talking to her on the phone, I said, Elaine, she said, yes, Georgie. I said, tell me what I was like when I was 3. Tell me what I was like when I was 4, because I don't remember.
Right.
You know, you try to remember your first memory. What was my first memory? And you know, I kind of remember snatches of things here and there. And of course, my parents have these movies that they took, so it's kind of fun to look back at those films. But I asked my sister, I said, what was I like? She said, you were a good kid. She said, you had a really good disposition about you. You were always happy, and you just enjoyed being around people. And I thought, wow, it started back then. It was going on back then. That pastoral thing, it was on me back then. And so it never really disappeared, but I was being trained. And what the Lord did was He set me aside from an actual pastoring position. And he put me in this ministry. And from 1976 until 1993, look at all the years that went by. Look at the years that from that day in 1975 when I heard from the Lord and He said, you're called to pastor. Change your major. Well, I would think, oh, okay, well, I'll finish up school here in 3 years and then I'll go back to New England. I'll start that church. That's not the way it went. That's why you have to really allow the Lord to be in control of where you're going and what's happening and the positions that you're taking and the things that He's opening doors for you to. And I never really thought to myself, well, I should be in Massachusetts right now. No, I was covered up here. When I first came here, I was over the art department, started the art department, and I was the artist, the in-house artist for a while. But this thing's growing so fast that I had to hire several people. But for 2 years, I was doing publications and art and traveling on the road with Brother Copeland. And what we would do was back then, we had a victory campaign every other week. Every other week. So I wasn't flying to the different places. We were in a van because you could fit all of the equipment, sound equipment, and the product in a van. In a van. And so they'd send us out a day or so before, and I didn't realize, I was new to this thing. I didn't realize that you drive all the way straight through. You don't stop anywhere. And all you do is you drive straight through and eat. You eat all the way. I thought, wow, I'm starting to gain some weight. That's what these guys did. They ate all the time. I remember one time we were in Lake Arlington. The offices were in Lake Arlington. And this was back when Kenneth and Gloria and the staff that we had would gather around the van and send us. They'd pray over us and they'd send us. So we all got into the van. They prayed over us. We all got in the van. This was my first meeting that I was on. First meeting. And they prayed over us. We left and we drove through downtown Fort Worth and exited off of downtown Fort Worth. And we stopped at a place called Old South Pancake House. And I thought to myself, we have not been on the road for 30 minutes and we're eating. We would eat our way through to all of the meetings that we went to. I don't know why I told you that. That was interesting. I was being trained, however, for what I'm doing right now. And all through those years, from all through the rest of the decade of the 70s and into the 80s. And into the 80s, by that time, we're out here. And the chapel building was being constructed. And Brother Copeland decided that we would have Sunday afternoon services. He didn't want to do Sunday morning services, didn't want to call it a church, but he wanted to have gatherings on Sunday afternoon. So the chapel that you see, somebody said the other day in conversation, they were talking about the old chapel. I'm like, ooh, the old chapel. Well, that's where we started having church, was in the chapel. And every so often when I go in there, and if I'm by myself, I'll just stop. There's Spencer, old chapel. I would stop, and I'd stop and just look around and think about, wow, we used to have church in here. We had up to 3 services going on a Sunday morning in this place. What a time we had. What an amazing time. Well, before I was pastoring, though, Brother Copeland, and I remember the first Sunday afternoon we came out, and we were a little bit late, and the place was packed. I mean, it's over 300 people in that room. It was packed. So Terry and I had to sit in the back. So we told each other, next Sunday, we're going to come early. We're going to get a seat. Well, then we came the next Sunday, and we were on the front row. There was only like 3 rows that got filled. I was like, what in the world happened between last Sunday and this? And Brother Copeland's getting up there, and he's announcing that he's going to be pastoring the church. And of course, you look at Gloria, and her mouth drops because that's the first time she's heard of that. Anyway, little did I know that one day I would be the pastor of that church. And as it grew, there were several different pastors. They would come, they would go, but there was this one time when the pastor left, I was executive director. By that time, I had inherited the whole thing. Enough people left where I got the whole thing. Anyway, so I was the executive director, and we're trying to find a pastor. We're asking everybody. Would you want to pastor the church? This guy's leaving at the end of the year. Do you want to pastor the church? And no. So we don't. It's getting closer to the end of the year. So I'm starting to think about it, and all of a sudden, that pastoral anointing starts coming up. And there was a meeting that Terry and I went to of Brother Hagin's over in Dallas. And he started talking about, in this meeting, he started talking about the office of the pastor and what the office of the pastor was like. He talked about it for a little less than a half an hour. And then he went back to what he was speaking on. But what he said it's so connected with me. I mean, through the years, I've done things. When Jerry Savelle had his church, way back when, I was an elder in his church. I was teaching a Sunday school class. So there were opportunities. Things were happening. But the full office of the pastor wasn't quite there yet. And I'm listening to this Brother Hagin. So I get the tape. I get that tape. I still have that tape. And I still go back and listen to it. Because I started listening to it. And I was hearing what he was saying, and there was something going on the inside of me. And I remember as we got closer and closer to the end of the year, Cindy and Spencer Nordyke, we went out to dinner one night. We were over in Las Colinas. And these guys are hounding me about pastoring. His wife, Cindy, she was like, "You're the pastor of that church. You're the pastor of that church." I'm like, "Shut up. You're the pastor of that church." I didn't know in my mind, I didn't know how I could do it. And I must admit, I was a little bit afraid of it. I was walking in a bit of fear because I'd seen too many pastors get hurt. I'd seen too much pressure on that pastoral office, and I'm like, whoa, I'm fine. I'm fine with being the executive director. It's funny because that was daunting to me when I first stepped into it, but you get used to it and you get into it and it becomes a part of your life, and I'm like, no, I'm not sure I can do this pastoring thing. Well, they're talking to me about it. Terry's talking to me about it. We were going to an ICFM meeting, faith conference meeting in downtown at Pastor Bob Nichols' church. And we're driving down there to this meeting and we're arguing. We're driving to a faith meeting and we're arguing with each other. And she's saying, "George, you are the pastor of that church." "Terry, stop. I am not the pastor. I'm not the pastor of that church." So we parked the car and we're mad going into church. I mean, it's terrible. We're going into church and we're both kind of upset and we're fighting that, and I sit down and all of a sudden Pastor Bob Nichols, who we know, we were married in that church. Terry and I were married in the church. So Pastor Bob Nichols was standing up there and he looked at me and he said, "George Pearsons, why don't you come up and give us a good word before we get started?" I'm like, ugh. So between the seat and the pulpit, I had to make some very important decisions before I got up there. I had to really go before the Lord. But it was a sign. It was a sign. And so I'm talking to Gloria one day. We're having a meeting. She and I worked very closely together, especially in those days. And this is 1992. We're looking for a pastor. And I'm talking to Gloria, and we're going through the list of all the things that we have to cover that day. And we get down to the church. Okay, what are we going to do? What are we going to do about the church? And I said, "Gloria, I've been thinking about it, and I've got an answer." She said, "What is it, George?" She said, "I will coordinate the church." See, I wasn't quite stepping on over into that realm of pastoring. I will coordinate the church. I can get speakers that'll come in. I can get great speakers. I can get Charles Capps. I can get this. I can get Spencer Nordyke. I can get all these wonderful people to come and speak in the church. And she said, "Well, we've got